Good afternoon, Native Food Sovereignty Fellows. Thank you for joining us on our today's training webinar, which is just an overview of food projects in Indian country. And before we get into it, I just wanted to let everyone know that this webinar is really informational in nature. The things that Erin is going to go over today are not necessarily things that apply to the site where you're serving, but we wanted to just provide you guys with kind of an overview of a variety of different food projects that are happening in Indian country, just to give you something to think about and to possibly think about what that might mean for your site and for projects that you're working on, or maybe projects that you can implement in the future. So we'll dive right into it, and I'll start by introducing today's presenter, Erin Sherrill. And Erin is the research director at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, where she supports the initiative through program development, research and writing, and analysis of legislative and regulatory issues affecting tribal governments, businesses, and individual producers. She helped author the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's Intertribal Food Systems Report, which features nearly 100 innovative food systems programs doing work across Indian country. Before her work with the initiative, she was a staff attorney and research coordinator for the Cabell Commission, a national working group convened by the Secretary of the Interior to repair the federal government's Indian Land Trust Management System. She's earned a JD and LLM in agriculture and food law from the University of Arkansas. And with that, Erin, the presentation is yours.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Food Sovereignty Fellows. I hope you all are having a good day, and I really appreciate you joining us to talk about some cool programs that have been out there in Indian country doing some work that may sound familiar to some of you, working on food sovereignty, working on food systems issues. Like Brian said, this may not be 100% directly relevant to your site placement, but I hope it just kind of gives you an idea of the scope of change that's happening right now in Indian country food systems, which is something that all of y'all are a part of. So I want you to feel, plugged into this bigger network of people. And all my slides are moving so quickly. Sorry, Brian. I think that was my fault. I got really excited and I pressed all the keys on my computer at once.
Erin, before you get too much further into it, let me just interject quickly and say that any of our attendees or fellows have a question during the presentation, just go ahead and type it into your questions box and submit it. And then when we get to the end of the presentation, I'll read your question out loud and Erin will answer them.
Yes, or I will try to answer. I'll do my best.
Yeah.
So for this first part, before we really dig into sort of the programs that I wanted to highlight today, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit with you all about what we mean when we talk about food sovereignty and food systems. And I think because you have been doing this great work out at all of your sites, you probably have your own ideas that you've developed either before you were at your placement or during the time you've been at your placement about what food sovereignty means as a term and about what a food system is. So normally we hold our questions till the very end, but if you have any thoughts about this that you want to pop in that discussion box right now, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Just think about it. It doesn't have to be a long drawn out answer. What do you think about when you think about food sovereignty? Like, what does that mean if you had to put a couple of words down? And it could just be a word or two. So I'll give you a second and we'll think about it. I wanted this to be a little interactive because I know it's a Monday and it's a webinar. And if you don't feel comfortable answering, that's cool too.
Okay, fellows. So use the questions box in your control panel and just punch in a couple of words about what food sovereignty or food systems means to you.
And Brian, if nobody feels comfortable answering, I'm going to call on you. So be prepared.
Okay.
I shouldn't have said that because now they're all just going to want to know what your answer is.
Well, I'll go ahead and answer.
Yeah.
To me, food sovereignty really means self-sufficiency.
Hmm.
It means knowing where your food is coming from,
Mm-hmm.
knowing who controls that kind of chain of custody, so to speak, from the time it is grown until the time it appears in someone's home to be eaten, um, and being able to produce that food in a way that feeds all the people in your community, that creates food security for your community.
Yeah. I think that's a really good answer, and I think that that's what a lot of people think of. I was really, I'm glad you used the word control because I feel like that's something that definitely comes up in a lot of definitions around food sovereignty. And if I can, there it goes. So this is a definition that I usually work with, and this was created by an international group of farmers and food advocates in the late 90s at an organization called La Via Campesina. And food sovereignty here, we determine it's the right of people. It's literally like this. These folks were determining this to be like a legal right that they wanted people to have, right? Was that people should be able to control their food system. They should be able to define what food is grown where they are, how that food is grown according to their own methods that are sound and sustainable based on their own cultural knowledge and cultural practices, that food should be healthy for those particular people and that it should be culturally appropriate food. So that's kind of what we talk about and think about when we think about food sovereignty, but that aspect of control over a food system is really built in right in there. And so when we think about food sovereignty, then we also think about food systems. So they're related. They're very related terms. I think of food systems being a part of food sovereignty. So I threw this definition up here. This is from that Intertribal Food Systems report that Brian mentioned at the beginning. And we're going to talk a lot about that report today because all three of the programs that I wanted to go over with y'all that are doing cool food systems work in Indian country are mentioned in this report. They're highlighted there. And this is kind of how we started when we started this report. This is how we decided that we're going to define a food system. It's this big, massive, interconnected web of people and processes and buildings and fields and water and land and air and everything that it takes to grow and distribute food for a specific community group. So for your food system where you're working at your site, you might think of it in terms of the entire tribe having a tribal food system. There can also be even tinier micro food systems within that just relate to one specific community within the tribe. You can really define a food system using any geographic boundary that you want to, but no matter what geographic boundary you're using to kind of put your arms around the food system, you're thinking about the physical and economic health of the community members as being part of that food system. Is that food nourishing the people who are in that community? Is it making it to all the people in the community? So are the people food secure? Do they have enough food to eat and they have a regular supply of it? Is that food culturally appropriate food for them? Is it promoting the kind of cultural stability and vibrancy that community wants it to? Is the food being produced in a way that the community wants it to be produced? All of those things are pieces of a food system. So when we get into the food system, like we're thinking in specifics and really concrete terms too, though. So I want you to think about literally the people who are working the land, the material, the people who are harvesting the food, and the people who are eating the food. Like even if I never set foot on a farm in my whole life, I'm still part of a food system because I am a person who needs to eat food to live. So a food system really connects all of us and kind of binds us together. So in a specific community group for your specific tribe, there's some pieces of work that you all are doing to support your food systems. You are directly contributing to the processes that kind of promote food sovereignty as a food sovereignty fellow, because you are helping establish and further tribal control over your food systems and the way food is produced, making sure it gets to different people. Like all of you are doing food systems work. So you're part of this really exciting food systems change that's kind of happening in Indian country around resilient and vibrant food systems. So
Aaron,
thank you. Yeah.
we did have a thought that came through from
Yeah.
Mariah, who's at our Lower Sioux site. And she says, here through our meetings with the food sovereignty team, we discussed how much of this ties into preserving and maintaining indigenous traditions in order to strengthen the community as a whole.
Yes, thank you so much. That's a really awesome comment, Mariah. And I think one of the first programs that we're going to talk about today is doing a lot of similar thoughts in that particular area. So thank you for sharing that. That's definitely a part of food systems planning to promote food sovereignty, and we see that in so many amazing programs and tribes across the country. So I hope that what we talk about today kind of energizes y'all and gives you some, leaves you reinvigorated to go back out and continue to do the awesome work that you're doing in all of the tribal communities that you're serving. So with that, I'm going to turn to the actual examples of innovative food work and some themes that we see in Indian country food and ag. Some of these may be familiar to you from the sites that you are working with right now. So all of this is going to relate back to this document that's on the screen here, this Intertribal Food Systems report that we did. We put this together back in 2015. It was commissioned by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, as Brian mentioned. And if you're interested in looking at this snapshot of what was happening in Indian country food systems at the time that we wrote it, please check it out. You can read it for free on our website. You can download it there, can share it around. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation also put together their own website for it, along with another side-by-side national report of non-tribal food systems work that was going on, and that was done by the Wallace Center at Winrock International. So you can check out that and the Intertribal Food Systems report, and we'll put some links up at the end of the presentation so you can find those if you're interested. But just know if you want more detail about this than what we're going to talk about today, you can find a lot of cool programs in this particular report. And it was just a snapshot. This work, like a food system, changes and grows every single day. So programs expand, they merge with other programs, there's collaboration going on all the time. So please, if you check it out, please enjoy that snapshot. We had a lot of fun putting it together and looking at all of the cool things that were happening in Indian country. And part of the things that we noticed as we were kind of, we did a big survey. That was part of the first part of how we did that report. We asked everybody at every intertribal gathering that we went to, we blasted out to tribal headquarters this survey about innovative food systems work that was happening in tribal communities all across the country. And we asked people to nominate programs that they knew of, that they were using in their communities, that they knew what were doing good work. So we got not quite 100 programs that we reported up. And as we were going through the survey results, we started noticing that there were some trends and themes in innovation that were happening in food systems work. And there were 3 of them that I'm going to cover today. This first one, as you can see on the screen, is food as medicine. This was a theme in a lot of the programs that were nominated for the report. People all across Indian country were putting together programs that were focusing on using medicine, using food as medicine, going back to traditional medicinal practices, and going back to traditional foods to improve health outcomes within tribal communities. So some of this may be really familiar to y'all. I know Mariah's comment was talking about, bringing back maybe some indigenous cultural knowledge as part of food sovereignty and food systems work. So this might be something that you are working on, or that you've heard discussed in some of those community food sovereignty meetings that you've been having, is this idea of bringing back traditional foods and food culture to restore health. And not just physical health, right, but spiritual and cultural health. All of that is kind of tied together in the tribal food system. And we see that in so many programs across the country. In these kinds of programs, there's usually a big emphasis on mapping traditional foods and foodways, and then utilizing those as resources to help the community heal physically and spiritually. And really, a lot of these programs also focus deeply on restoring cultural connections through food. There's usually some language revitalization elements around food and cultural ceremonies, around processing and practicing with the food, and really connecting elders and culture keepers to the young people within the tribal community, so that those food traditions continue to be passed on for future generations, on and on through, and so that they're sustained through the practice of using them. And that's one of the big things that we noticed. So there's a lot of programs out there that do things like this. And there's a second theme that we noticed, and that was that a lot of programs do youth development, that they're founded to connect youth to the food system, to reconnect youth with tribal foods, whether they're traditional or more recently introduced to the tribal food system. There was this movement within Indian country food systems work to build up tribal youth and support their future through food and agriculture. So there's a big emphasis, as you can imagine, in these programs on mentorship for youth, both peers, sort of youth mentoring youth and youth leading youth, and again, connecting elders to youth. That's another piece of these programs that we see. There's a lot of skills development work that happens here, especially, as you can imagine, around food, since these are food systems programs. There's a lot of training for youth in terms of harvesting food and gathering foods, especially if they're focused on traditional foods, growing and preparing the food, but also for non-traditional foods, just helping youth connect with the land and learning what it takes to grow food in their particular environment, whether that's outside or whether it's in a hoop house or a greenhouse, learning, you know, what the ins and outs of agriculture, and connecting youth to food through that work. Language revitalization is another thing that we often see in these particular in this particular bucket of programs. They're pretty key components, especially if folks are working with traditional foods, as we see a lot of elders mentoring youth and again passing on language, passing on cultural traditions while all of this development is happening. And the third category of themes was market access. So a lot of tribes across the country are really investing in food and agriculture in a big way, as a means of improving not just physical health for their people in terms of access to fresh fruits and vegetables and more traditional foods, but also economic health and building a long-term sustainable economy for tribal members by investing in food and agricultural production, whether that's traditional foods or non-traditional foods, or value-added foods, or all of the above. There's a big trend out there in Indian country to kind of create markets where there haven't been before, to get tribal foods into new food markets. So there was obviously in these programs, you'll see an emphasis on food production. A lot of these programs are really focused in on employing tribal members and making sure that the food that they're growing is available to tribal members, so that they're not just selling it outside of the tribal community, but they're trying to sell it inside, either through farmers markets, through mobile markets, through elder care programs, or some combination of all of those things. You see a lot of focus in these programs on making sure that elders are provided for in the community. That's a big piece of a lot of programs that are creating markets in tribal communities. And there's also the production of a lot of different kinds of foods. It's usually not just one kind of food, but if a tribe starts a food business, there's usually a lot of different kinds of products that they're growing. So a lot of variety, a lot of diversity in the foods that are being produced. And these are programs that may also overlap sometimes with some of the other ones. There's usually like a youth development component. The program that I'm going to talk about today actually involves quite a few things in addition to market access. They were trying to make sure that people's health was improved through the foods they were growing, and also employing tribal members and pulling in youth from the local tribal schools so that they could learn the process of growing food and connect with the land through the food. So there's just a lot of really exciting work going on. And these were kind of the three major themes that we saw as we went through the survey that we did before we wrote the Intertribal Food Systems report. So I wanted to give y'all kind of a brief overview of the themes that we found, but I also wanted to give you some specific examples of exactly what I meant when I was talking about each of these themes. So I am going to talk about these three programs today. I'm going to talk about Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty, the Coach to Youth Experience, and the Choctaw Fresh Produce. And those are going to kind of be the examples that I want to lift up today of innovation in these three thematic areas. Before we really dig into them, I want you to think, as we're talking through some of these programs, about the overlap between these themes, because it would be really, really rare for, if you think about a food system and how we talked about it being connections between all of these different people and processes that make food happen within a specific community. Considering that, it would be really weird if one of these programs just only did food as medicine, or only did youth development, or only was focused on market access. Because it's in a food system, there are all those connections. So even if you start with the intention of building a food business to have more sustainable economic health for the tribal community, you might start seeing some food as medicine elements pop up later. Those are kind of ancillary benefits that maybe you weren't, that wasn't your number one priority when you developed the program, but they're still coming with doing this food systems work, that there's a whole lot of change happening all through the food system, because you can't just do one piece. Inevitably, it just kind of all works together because everything is so interconnected. So as we talk about these programs, think about just those interrelated pieces. the things that are maybe happy unintended consequences of doing a program to support health, or doing a program to support youth, or doing a program to support the economy. So without further ado, here's some examples. We're going to talk about food as medicine first. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty up in Auburn and Bellingham, Washington. This program was started by Valerie Segrest, who took all the photos that you can see here on the screen. And there's a little quote about from her here about salmon and how important it was to have salmon's a traditional food for the Muckleshoot tribe, and so to have that on the menu in all of the community kitchens that they founded was a really important piece of this to her. So the Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty project is initially, that was the very first name that this project was known by, and it was initially a collaboration between a nonprofit and that Valerie had founded and the Northwest Indian College. The Muckleshoot tribe eventually sort of incorporated the program across all of its communities and sort of moved out of the college and became its own thing. They're really focused on cultural and health education through traditional food and through indigenous diets, and kind of getting back to traditional foods, traditional foodways to improve health within the Muckleshoot community. And not just physical health outcomes, but mental health, spiritual health, cultural health, reconnecting to food and seeing all of those health benefits through reconnecting to food. So some of the things that they did were develop community kitchens. They had 6 community kitchens that provided over 1,000 meals a day altogether throughout the tribal community that were trying to increase health and increase nutrition awareness, especially through traditional meals, entirely traditional meals. So that's where that quote from Valerie here about salmon comes from, is like trying to really focus in on getting that traditional food to the people in the community to improve health. They had cooks, like 20 cooks all across the tribal community that came and volunteered and partnered to be able to do these meals and serve these meals for everybody through the community. Really wanted to drive change too. I know Valerie is a nutritionist and herbalist, and she did a lot of trainings through this program on traditional medicine and healing through traditional medicine. So there were people who were working through the tribal college and the tribal schools, working to educate community members about traditional foods and traditional medicines, where to find them, where to harvest them, the sorts of things that they could do with those traditional foods and medicines to improve health. And so this program really, I think, definitely exemplifies this food as medicine thing, right? It's absolutely a connection to traditional food and to culture in order to improve health. So that is one of the programs that's in this category. If you look at the report, you can see a whole lot more. And some of you may be doing some really similar work at your sites and your communities, trying to connect folks with and improve gathering or production of traditional food, of traditional medicine, with the specific goal of improving health. So this may be, if you're in that, if kind of in that space and doing that work at your site, or it's something that your community has kind of lifted up, they might want to think about, this may be a good program to check out and see the work that they did, and kind of see if there's any important lessons that you might be able to sort of propose to your community, or any innovative aspects of their program that might be something that you could implement in your site or propose to implement. So if this is something that's relevant, then please check it out. You can find it in the community intertribal food systems report that we did. And you can definitely email me about it. And Valerie's still working on Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty. She's started a new organization called Feed 7 Generations, and they're continuing the work that she started with the Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty Project. So this work is definitely still continuing up there in the Pacific Northwest. So I wanted to lift them up as an example of food as medicine. And in youth development, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Coach to Youth Experience, which is down in Coach to Pueblo, New Mexico. This is a program that was founded in 2012 by a colleague of mine, Ade Romero Briones. If anybody's familiar with Ade, she's awesome. She's at First Nations Development Institute now. She's doing great work there. And she had founded Coach to Youth Experience back in 2012 and 2013, just to really connect the youth in Coach to Pueblo with food and agriculture, and give them a space to connect with farming, which was something that Coach T people had been doing since time immemorial. They had always been farmers and really wanted to reconnect the youth with the land, with those traditional practices around farming, get them back out and working on the land and learning about the traditional foods, especially some of their traditional corn is a big aspect of the Coach T youth experience that they did. They did a project with laughing corn, which was a traditional corn that they grew for ceremonial purposes. And so one of the things that they did through Coach T Youth Experience was try to kind of reinvigorate that and bring that back and reconnect the youth with that piece of their culture and with their lands so that they could pass that tradition on then to their children and their children and on and on. So that was a big piece of this. Another big piece of this program was putting together youth with elders and having sort of a youth elder mentoring component to this work. So I mentioned that in the themes that we saw in the youth development piece, and I think this exemplifies that for sure. That was definitely a big piece of the Coach T Youth Experience, was getting youth partnered and paired up with elders in the community who were culture keepers, who had been doing this farming for their whole lives so that they could pass on their knowledge to the youth and they could mentor and help train the youth to be able to work the lands and have that same connection and cultural knowledge with food that they had. They also did a lot of meal service to their community. I know in 2012, they served over 2,000 meals to their community members. There's a lot of traditional food grown through those programs, the youth learning to prepare traditional food through those programs, which is obviously a really important piece of development for them and also for future generations in Cochiti Pueblo. So if you are doing any kind of youth work or if that's of interest to anybody at your sites, this may be a program model that you want to check out because you might want to think about adding in those youth and elder connections, or this may be something that you're already doing. But this is a really good example of, I think, how to connect people within the community to one another through food. That was definitely a very successful model, I think, for Cochiti Pueblo. So if that's relevant, please check it out. Again, it's in the Intertribal Food Systems report, or you can ask me about it. I am happy to talk about these programs all day. And the last one I wanted to talk about is our market access program. So this is CHOCTAW Fresh Produce. It is a tribally owned business, part of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. It was launched in 2012. A lot of these programs you'll see launched around 2012. It was an exciting year for food systems work in Indian country, which it always is. Every year is exciting. But 2012 also saw the first year of business for Choctaw Fresh Produce. That they opened this business. Actually, they started considering doing this business in the summer of 2010. They have a tribally owned casino, the Pearl River Resort, which is inside the tribal boundaries of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. And their casino food and beverage director wanted to know if it would be possible to source more locally grown, tribally grown, fresh fruits and vegetables for the casino specifically. So that was when they started considering doing this as a business. Now, when I talk about market access, I mean, like, there wasn't a market for this food before, but all of a sudden the casino director said, hey, we want to source more local food. Can we do this? Can we make this cash flow? And all of a sudden there's a possibility of a market. That's like creating a market for your food, like creating a place to sell your food. So they didn't have the greenhouses or any of the farms set up. They just had a question about whether or not that was something that they could do. So they did a lot of market survey research. They did a lot of community survey research. They had a lot of community planning meetings where they went around to all 8 communities within the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians and talked about economic development strategies and what kinds of projects the community really wanted to see and what they thought was really important to focus on. And community greenhouses were actually really highly ranked among all of their communities. That was something that all 8 communities really wanted to see, was more community greenhouses. They thought that would be really good for the tribe, that there might be some job creation that could happen, that it would improve the health of the tribal community because they had been struggling, as many other communities do, with high incidences of type 2 diabetes. And so they wanted a way to access more fresh fruits and vegetables to try to mitigate the effects of that, improve their health. increasing awareness of their local food systems, and really, also just creating this economic opportunity for the tribe. So with that, they took all that information from the community and they created this business in 2012, the Choctaw Fresh Produce business. After a couple of years, they've been able to expand. They sold not just within the tribal community, which is something that they do. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the concept of a community supported agriculture, or a CSA box. They did a TSA box, not the Transportation Security Administration, but a tribally supported agriculture box. So they had tribal members who were able to buy shares of the bounty that would be produced from these community greenhouses. And then every week, those folks would get a basket of fresh produce from the greenhouses that they started. They had 5 greenhouses that grow a whole range of fresh fruits and vegetables. They were so successful at growing that they were able to expand, not just to have those tribally supported agriculture boxes, but also community supported agriculture for non-tribal members or tribal members who lived outside the boundaries of the reservation. They now sell to Whole Foods in Mississippi, so that's another new market that's opened up for them. They've created a mobile market to be able to go around and make sure they could reach people who couldn't necessarily get out and come to a farmer's market or other market to get their products. So you can see in the picture here, they've got a little mobile market there. They do a lot of really cool stuff. And one of the things that they try to do is employ tribal members, try to make sure that tribal members have access to this fresh produce that they're growing, that their employees have access to the fresh produce that they're growing. That was a big thing for them. I believe that in the beginning of their program, one of the decisions they made was to donate some of the food that maybe didn't sell for the day to local elder centers, elder care centers, and tribal schools, so that it made sure that it was being used and being eaten by the community. They also, I believe, have one of their sites is actually near to the tribal school, so they do some cooperation with the school where they're able to incorporate some learning with the young people who are attending the school, so that they get some knowledge about how to grow food, what they get a taste for fresh fruits and vegetables really early on in their lives. And through this program, they have seen they've seen that youth development happen, and they've also seen some good health effects from the community members having access to more fresh fruits and vegetables. So that's some more of those connections that you can think about, and that this was a program that was started initially really to try to start a business and do some economic development through food and agriculture, but that came with it some health benefits and some youth development benefits. So there are some more of those connections that you can think about in terms of food systems and how interconnected everything really is when you're doing food and ag work. So if starting some kind of farm or community garden is of interest to the sites, I think a couple of y'all are doing community gardening. It may or may not be a for-profit business, but that doesn't mean that you can't see some connections maybe between what you're doing and Choctaw Fresh Produce. So this may be of significant interest to some of y'all, especially if you're doing those community gardens, or if your tribe that you're working with is interested in starting a business or has a food business. This may be a model that you want to check out just to kind of see another aspect of tribal food and ag work. So those are kind of the 3 programs that I wanted to hit over today and talk to you about. I don't know if anybody has thoughts or questions, but I am here and I am happy to share my thoughts with you if you have questions, or listen to your thoughts if you have thoughts. So I will take any of those thoughts and questions now.
All right, thank you, Erin. That was, even though it's a relatively short presentation, that was a lot to digest.
Yeah.
Because we talked about traditional foods, you talked about youth programs, you talked about market access, and even creating a market where there may not have been market access. So that's a lot. And I think that just about all of those things apply to most, if not all, of our Vista sites.
Yeah.
So, fellows, if you have any questions for Erin, now would be a good time to ask. I'll also reiterate that you can contact Erin after this presentation if you just want to talk about this stuff. And I know for a fact that Erin loves talking about this stuff. So
You could just stop with Aaron loves talking, which I think is evident to everyone. But I do specifically love talking about all this work. I think
yes.
it's really, really exciting, and I hope that y'all are really energized about the work that you're doing, because it's just you're doing so much good work for people. You really are. Like, food systems work is so, so important because we do all have to eat, but what we eat makes such a huge difference in our health just overall. I mean, I think that looking at these programs, you can tell. So if you don't have any questions right now, or you want to think about it, my contact info is on the screen. You can email me, you can call me. Our phones finally work here at the office again.
Mm.
So that number actually works. You can actually reach me. You can tweet at me if you want. That's my handle. Actually, I need to fix that. That's my old one. Just kidding.
Hmm.
You can tweet at me though.
And anyone that wants to download that full report that Aaron has been referencing, it actually is in the handouts section of your
Awesome.
control panel. There's a PDF there of that report, and the PDF of today's presentation are both there. And you should be able to just drag that to your desktop. If you have trouble doing that and you want those reports, you can contact Aaron, or you can contact me, and I'll get them right over to you. Okay, last call for any questions. And all right, we did have one that came in from Annabelle, who's in Alaska, and
Oh, it's
she
early for you. Sorry. Oh, hello, Annabelle. Good morning.
she's asking any basic steps, tips on how to get to these successes. Great projects, thanks.
On how to achieve them, I think a lot of the things that all of these programs, one of the things that all these programs have in common is that I think they all started with significant community engagement. I mean, I think definitely saw that in that last one with Choctaw Fresh, because they had community meetings all around the community to start talking about what they wanted to do and what the community's priorities were. I think Muckleshoot, I don't know if they did this at the very beginning of Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty, but since then I know they've done a community food sovereignty assessment using that First Nations food sovereignty assessment tool. And that I think that's something that a lot of y'all are familiar with. But I think really just getting community members in a room and talking is one of the first steps that a lot of the programs that we saw had in common, was really putting people together, letting them talk, maybe having them together around a meal is really good, so people can just kind of sit and think and give feedback as to what they want to see and what they see as a need and what they see as resources that the community has. Really putting all that brain power in one room is really important, I think. So that would be my first tip, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I think I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight, obviously, to make programs work, you're going to have money, even if they're nonprofits. A lot of these programs were funded by a variety of different grants in their initial phases. I think Choctaw Fresh has transitioned into a business model, but they originally started with a grant. I think it was an A&A grant. It's a federal program that they had applied for. And so they were able to get a grant to start their program. So there are a lot of other federal and non-federal grants, like CHOCTAW, for example, I think was funded initially through First Nations Development Institute, one of their native food systems grant projects, I believe. Muckleshoot also, I think, has been a First Nations grantee. And so just I think the community engagement piece may need to come first, because you want to find out what the community wants to do. But after that, it's a lot of looking around to see how you can make the program kind of help the program get stood up through grant making and grant writing and that sort of thing. So I would highlight that too, because I think a lot of the programs that we looked at in that Intertribal Food Systems report were grant funded, at least initially, and not necessarily funded through the tribe. Although I think the ones that are expanding have received a lot more tribal support over their lifetime. So I hope that helps. It's a good question.
All right. Annabelle says, thank you, very helpful. All right. So I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, so we'll move toward concluding today's webinar. And I'll put Erin's information back up on the screen there. So just a reminder, we will be having more trainings on the horizon. I'm in the process now of getting together our training schedule for the fall, and so I'll be looking for an email from me here in the next week or so with our upcoming webinars for the fall. And I want to thank everyone for attending and making the time today. Once again, if you have any questions about any of the materials that we covered in this presentation, Erin's contact information is on the screen. You all know how to contact me. So please contact us with any questions, or if you need me to send you any materials related to today's presentation. And with that, Erin, do you have any final thoughts before we close it out?
I just want to thank everybody again, not only for being on the webinar today, but for the great work that you're doing and supporting tribal food systems all across Indian country. If you have any questions, like Brian said, please hit me up. I am happy to talk. Thanks, y'all.
All right. Thanks, Erin. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. And we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.